Hi everybody, welcome to D&D Optimized, the show where each episode we take a deep dive into one specific character build for Dungeons & Dragons 5e and do our best to optimize it to give you the greatest numerical advantage for your chosen role. My name's Colby, and I'm happy to have you along. Thanks for being here. If you are looking for ideas to get the most out of your D&D character, or maybe looking for ideas for your next character, your next adventure, or if you just really love the theory crafting and diving into the mechanics and the geeky numbers of Dungeons & Dragons, this show is for you. So happy to have you. Before we jump into the episode this week, there are a few housekeeping items that I wanted to address really quickly. First, big thanks to everyone who has been watching, listening, viewing, commenting, liking, subscribing especially. That's big right now. We seem to have gotten a little bump in the last few days, and so I'm grateful for that. Just a reminder that there is a podcast version and a YouTube version of the show. So I seem to be getting more traction on YouTube for whatever reason, but if you are looking for something to listen to while you mow the lawn or drive to work, or maybe just a soothing voice that's kind of boring and is going to help you fall asleep at night, feel free to check out the podcast as well. On the note of receiving comments, which I'm grateful for, I have been getting some constructive criticism, which I am also grateful for. And usually it is along the lines of, focusing on optimization and numbers is going to kill the game, and don't do this. You're going to ruin the game for people, which I anticipated and also appreciate. I have friends that have similar feelings, and I guess I just would say I happen to be the type of person that loves gaming and spreadsheets and diving into the nuts and bolts and the gears and the mechanics of a game and comparing and contrasting, if I tweaked this a little bit, how would it impact, and then how would it compare? I want to see it graphed, that to me is a lot of fun. And I hope that that I find an audience of like-minded individuals that also love that kind of getting into the nuts and bolts and nitty-gritty of something and seeing how to maybe eke a little more damage out or improve it in this way or that way. By no means is my goal to reduce this very fantastic game that we all love to just the numbers, right? Ultimately, we all play this game for different reasons, but it's the interaction with friends, it's the character progress and character building and storytelling and role playing and things that without those things that are really the most important aspect of Dungeons and Dragons, I think we'd probably all agree the numbers would be boring and meaningless. But since we have all of those other things too, the numbers are fascinating to me at least, and hopefully to you as well. So that's kind of my response, I suppose, to that criticism. It's I get a lot of enjoyment from exploring and graphing the numbers and the mechanics. I hope you do as well. And assuming that you do, please continue to watch and listen and subscribe and tell your friends. Speaking of previous episodes, so last week we did the Sorcerer, which was our first Nova build, and for some reason that particular episode seems to have gained a lot more traction than the others that I had done. I guess I shouldn't be too surprised that this character can do 1 billion damage in a single round episode was the one that seems to be garnering the greatest viewership and listenership. If you haven't checked it out yet, please do so. But I needed to make an addendum to that episode. I woke up at 2:00 in the morning a couple days ago, just because this is the way that my brain works sometimes, and thought, if I would have added 2 levels of fighter at 14 and 15, I could have picked up Action Surge, and even though I'd be sacrificing some higher level spell slots, to upcast Shadow Blade and Paladin Smites, it would be worth it to get those extra, 2 attacks. It would end up being a lot more damage. So feel free, if you're considering an Assassiner build or something like it, to add that. It would probably put you over 500 damage in a single round at level 20. Anyway, I'm not going to go rework the numbers or update my spreadsheets or anything, but just know that that's there. And also, one of my YouTube subscribers, Shirak8, mentioned something that I just completely spaced, which was, you should be casting Booming Blade as your action until you get to the point where when you take the attack action, you get to attack twice. And that doesn't happen for that build until Ranger 5, which doesn't come until level 13, I believe. And so, yeah, because that way, with you Booming Blade as your action, and then bonus action, Quicken Spell, Booming Blade as your bonus action. And then you just pick up that additional Booming Blade action, which, because you're critting, is doubled. The dice, that is, are doubled. So, yeah, it would end up being significantly more damage. So thanks, Shrek8, for that catch. I appreciate it. Finally, I am going to try and trim things up just a wee bit here. Right now, the episodes have all been coming in at around 42 minutes. It feels a little long to me. Let me know if you disagree, but I'm probably, putting a lot of you to sleep. So I'm gonna try and be a little more concise. I just want to focus on the aspects of the build that are pertinent to the numbers that we're going to be talking about. So instead of going level by level and talking about every single thing that you get at each level, I'll only pause to talk about something that you gain at a certain level if it directly impacts the numbers for the roll that we're discussing. So if it's sustained damage and it's a cool feature, but it doesn't impact the sustained damage, I'm probably not going to mention it, just to see if I can't trim a few minutes off of each episode. So now that I've added several minutes to this episode, let's begin. Episode 6, we are going to be talking about what I'm calling the Eldritch Sorcerer. Another YouTube subscriber, shout out to Game Assassinate, requested a sorcerer build, and I had this particular build in mind already, so I thought I'd bump it to the top of the queue. So thanks for the suggestion, Game Assassinate. He wanted to see I'm assuming it's a he or she, wanted to see a sorcerer build. And even though last week's episode had more levels of sorcerer than anything else, by the end, it wasn't really a sorc build, right? We were just using sorcerer for spell slots and meta magic primarily. The problem, however, with an optimized sorcerer build is, if we're talking damage, at least, we're not really talking about things that are unique or different necessarily to the sorcerer themselves. What we're really talking about are the sorcerer spells, most of which are available to other classes too, right? And so, if we want to look at sustained damage or burst damage of a sorcerer, we're probably going to be really talking about the sustained damage or burst damage of various spells, which I think is an important and interesting conversation to have, but probably not necessarily a let's do an optimized sorcerer build discussion, right? So the problem then was, how do you honor the concept of the sorcerer, this charismatic, ranged spell slinger that's doing lots of magic damage and among other things, but build them in a way where their damage is truly sustainable, i.e., in other words, not necessarily taking up a lot of spell slots, or especially high-level spell slots, to sort of maintain that damage. And I think the answer, the best one that I can come up with anyway, is to multi-class them a little bit with a warlock, thus the Eldritch Sorcerer. So here's the concept, the character concept. You start Sorcerer, and then you take some warlock levels just to level 3, and then you go sorcerer the rest of the way. So this gives you access to some key warlock abilities that are going to let you do some great sustained damage, namely Eldritch Blast, the cantrip that warlocks have that everybody knows and loves, and Darkness to give yourself advantage and enemies disadvantage on attacks against you. I know we already did a Darkness-focused warlock in episode 1, the Pamlock, but this is just a dip, and I'm still considering this a sorcerer build. Gosh, why is this guy always talking about warlocks? I don't even like warlocks. So once you get going, basically the concept is you cover yourself in a big bubble of darkness, and then you're just shooting out purple lasers at everybody. They can't see where it's coming from, when the next attack is going to come, so you'll have advantage. And you're also going to be having a sweet spiritual weapon flying around the battlefield and doing some nice additional damage on your bonus action. So you really get very good sustained damage that's truly sustained. You're barely spending any spell slots, just darkness for your spell slot. And so you're still doing great sustained damage with the option to do some pretty strong burst damage and nova damage as well at will when needed, and then still maintaining all of those awesome important spell slots, high level spell slots that sorcerers get to use for anything from area damage, fireballs, to healing spells, which you'll be picking up, to utility, defensive stuff. It just lets you have a huge bag of tricks at your fingertips, and still be able to do great damage without expending many resources. So let's jump into the build. At level 1, you're going to start off with the sorcerer class, primarily because they get proficiency in Constitution saves, and that is important in general in D&D, but particularly for you because you're going to be using concentration all the time, pretty much, for darkness, and so that's going to help you maintain that darkness and not break concentration. Your race, I'm going to recommend a half-elf, particularly a drow half-elf, for 3 reasons. 1, at level 5, the drow half-elf is going to get the ability to cast darkness without taking up a spell slot. That's awesome. 2, they have a really high charisma score, and that's your most important stat as a sorcerer and as a warlock. And 3, it will give you access to the Elven Accuracy feat. And since you are going to have advantage almost all of the time with darkness on you, you really benefit from Elven Accuracy. So that should probably be your race. Your stats, assuming a point buy, you're going to buy 15 charisma, 15 constitution, because HP is great, and again to bump your con saves, and a 13 dex, and then you're going to get a +2 racial to charisma, +1. You use your other 2 +1s that half elves get for constitution and dex. So you'd have 17 charisma, 16 constitution, 14 dex, and then do what you want with the rest of your points, whatever makes the most sense for your character. The sorceress origin that you choose at level 1, we're going to want to take Divine Soul. Divine Soul gives you access to all cleric spells, which is fantastic, right? You don't have to multi-class into cleric, but you get access to all their spells. And so it lets you operate as kind of a support healer if you want to, particularly because you're not going to be, like I've mentioned, you're not going to be using too many of your spell slots for your damage most of the time. More importantly, it gives you access, for our purposes, it gives you access to the spiritual weapon spell, which is one of the strongest cleric spells, maybe one of the strongest spells in the game, I'd argue, because it doesn't require concentration, but it lasts for a minute and lets you weaponize your bonus action, so you can do damage with your bonus action. Spells at first level, take what you want. I would recommend, picking up probably Firebolt and Toll the Dead, so you can have some decent damage at level 1. I would grab Shield, the Shield spell, a level 1 shield for survivability. lets you, as a reaction, increase your armor class by 5 when you get hit. No good spellcaster should leave home without it. As for equipment, if your DM is okay to let you do a gold buy instead of standard equipment, I would do that and try and pick up a shield and medium armor. Even though you can't use them yet, you will be shortly, and it's going to help you out a lot. Otherwise, it doesn't matter too much for our purposes what you take equipment-wise. So at level 2, you are going to start your Warlock dip. You're going to take first level of Warlock here, and it's just important so that you can get your DPR, your damage per round train rolling. Important things to make sure you pick up: as a cantrip, get Eldritch Blast. That's what we're really going to be using for our bread and butter. It's a D10 of damage. It's a cantrip. You cast it as an action. It's a D10 of damage, and it has a range of 120 feet. At higher levels, you're gonna get multiple beams, so it's gonna add up quickly once you start shooting out multiple beams when you cast Eldritch Blast. You get an otherworldly patron. You're going to want to go Hexblade. That's my recommendation. It's a little boring, I know, because every Warlock goes Hexblade, it seems. But it gives you proficiency with medium armor and shields. And so since you have a +2 dex bonus, which is the cap for medium armor, if you get medium armor and a shield, your AC, your armor class will be between 16 and 18, depending on what kind of medium armor you get. Couple that with using the shield spell when you need it, you'll be at a 21 to 23 armor class a lot of the time. And as a level 2 caster, that's phenomenal. And right now, your goal really is just to stay alive. Stay alive. Also, Hexblade's Curse is a really nice feature that Hexblades get. It gives you some improved sort of on-demand damage on one target per short rest. You curse them, and now every attack that you land on them does damage equal to your proficiency bonus. So when there's a big baddie, a boss fight, whatever, it's great to have, and it's going to help you do some extra damage, which we'll get into more later. Spells that you take as a Warlock level 1, whatever sounds good. A note on multiclassing with Warlocks: most spellcasters, when they multiclass, have a special chart in the player's handbook that indicates to them, depending on how many levels of which type of spellcaster they take, that's how many and what type of spell slots you have. It doesn't work that way with Warlocks. Warlock spell slots are Warlock spell slots. Sorcerer spell slots are Sorcerer spell slots, and never the twain shall meet. You can use your Warlock spell slots to upcast. You can use your Sorcerer spell slots to upcast Warlock spells, and vice versa if you want to, but you don't use the multi-classing spellcaster table. So at level 2, you have Warlock level 1 spells and Sorcerer level 1 spells. And if you have questions on that, let me know. At level 3, most casters are going to have access to level 2 spells, but you don't yet because you're a Warlock 2, Sorcerer 1. And so anyway, you're going to pick up, as a Warlock 2, you're going to pick up Eldritch Invocations. These are very important. You want to get Agonizing Blast, which is going to let you add your charisma modifier to the damage that Eldritch Blast does. So now it's like a weapon attack. You get to do your D10 plus your charisma bonus. That's fantastic. And very importantly, Devil's Sight, which lets you see in darkness, even magical darkness. At level 4, you are taking your third and final level of Warlock, and you get a Pact feature. You don't get much from Pact of the Blade with this build, so I'd probably go Pact of the Chain or Pact of the Tome, whichever suits your character better. If it were me, I'd probably go Pact of the Chain. I'll explain why later. That gives you a familiar that you can use and take advantage of, and those are always handy to have. You do now get level 2 Warlock spells. So pick up Darkness. And again, for those who don't know, Darkness, basically you're going to cast it on yourself, or say like an article of clothing or something that you're carrying, and that will put you in a 30-foot bubble of magical darkness that even if you have dark vision, you can't see through. And because the enemy can't see you, when you make attacks from within the darkness, because you can see because of Devil's Sight, when you make attacks from within your darkness bubble, you do so with advantage, and attacks against you are made at disadvantage. So that's great for your survivability and for your DPR, as long as you maintain concentration, the concentration required to keep the spell up. At level 5, you are going back to Sorcerer, and you're not looking back. You're going Sorcerer the rest of the way. So Sorcerer 2, Eldritch Blast now fires twice. That's big. Keep in mind, Eldritch Blast is a cantrip, and like all other offensive cantrips, it gets increases to its damage at 5, 11, and 17. And that's based on character level, not class level. So even though you're only a Warlock 3, your level 5 Eldritch Blast fires twice. That's big. That's like a martial character that's getting 2 weapon attacks when they take the attack action, right? Also, Half-Elf Drow can now cast Darkness once per long rest without using a spell slot, so that's nice. It'll save you some spell slots. At level 6, you are Sorcerer 3, and you get Meta Magic. So you started getting Sorcerer points last level, but you could only use them then to create more spell slots for yourself, which is nice. But now you're getting meta magic options, and the only one that I'm going to recommend is Quicken Spell. Quicken Spell is great. It lets you spend 2 sorcery points and then cast a spell that's normally an action as a bonus action. So you're going to use Eldritch Blast as your action and then potentially quicken Eldritch Blast and cast it as a bonus action, and you can do that because it's a cantrip, and the rules say that you can cast 2 spells per turn as long as one of them is a cantrip and a bonus action. You can cast a second spell as a bonus action as long as one of the spells you're casting is a cantrip. So you could, when need be, throw out 4 Eldritch Blasts in a single round, which is great, particularly when coupled with your Hexblade's Curse. So if you've got a big baddie that you really need to take down, throw Hexblade's Curse on them, and then 4 Eldritch Blasts, doing that extra, proficiency bonus damage each time. That's really going to add up and help you take out one big bad enemy fairly quickly. And again, remember, the curse lasts until either your target is dead or you are, basically. So it is bursty, almost Nova damage, but it's fairly sustainable, particularly at later levels when you have lots of spell slots to spare that you can convert into sorcery points, and you'll have lots of sorcery points to be able to spend to quicken Eldritch Blast. Remember that, again, when you do that, you're using your bonus action, so you're not going to be able to use your bonus action for Spiritual Weapon, which I'll talk about in a second. But back to meta magic, there are lots of cool, fun, unique options for meta magic. Knock yourself out. Distant Spell lets you Eldritch Blast from 240 feet if you wanted. There's Careful Spell. Twin Spell is really powerful. Lots of good options. So, take what makes the most sense for your character and is the most fun. Otherwise, for spells that you pick up as a level 3 sorcerer, you now have access to level 2 spells, including cleric spells, which means you can get Spiritual Weapon. So the way Spiritual Weapon works is it summons a spiritual weapon, and you can choose what it looks like. It doesn't have to be a hammer. So you get this cool Spiritual Weapon, and it's going to do 1d8 of damage plus your charisma modifier. It lasts a minute, and it doesn't require concentration, which is one thing that makes it so fabulous. So it takes your bonus action, and you basically tell it to hit somebody. You can upcast it for more damage, but only every other level. So If you cast it as a level 4 spell, it'll do 2d8. As a level 6 spell, it'll do 3d8, etc. And you likely will be upcasting it in that way. Here's something to talk about with your Dungeon Master. So you, the Warlock, are the one making the melee spell attack as per the rules when you read about this spell. Do you have advantage? Because you are the one making the attack and you are in darkness. Your enemy can't see you, but your spiritual weapon is probably not in darkness. Therefore, you could argue that the attack is not made with concentration. I think rules as written, you probably do get advantage. Maybe rules as intended, maybe not. And ultimately, it's going to be up to your Dungeon Master. So discuss that with them. If they say no, the spiritual weapon attack is not made with advantage, then I would definitely make sure that you go Pact of the Chain, so you get a familiar, because your familiar can, as their action, take the help action, which would give you advantage, potentially, or someone else in your party, but it would give you advantage on the first attack that you make. So use your bonus action first, attack with a spiritual weapon, and now you have advantage if you've got a familiar and it's taking the help action. Either way, I'm going to assume, just because it's easier to crunch the numbers, for our purposes, that the spiritual weapon is made, the attack is made with advantage. So everything has come together now at level 6, and here's how combat works. Combat starts, you cast darkness on yourself, and then as a bonus action, spiritual weapon and attack. From then on, you are floating around in your bubble of darkness, firing out your Eldritch Blast lasers, doing spiritual weapon bonus attack, and all of those attacks made with advantage. 2 dice now. Soon it will be 3 once we get Elven Accuracy, and that's going to mean a lot more hits and a lot more crits. And then just casting other spells to buff or do area effect damage or heal or teleport around the battlefield or whatever you need to do as the need arises. So damage report at level 6 versus a 10 armor class. You're going to be averaging 25 DPR. It's not phenomenal. That's not bad. And if your target is cursed and you're using Quicken Spell, so you're really kind of trying to crank out some burst damage, it's 49 DPR, almost double. That's great. Again, keep in mind, you can't use Spiritual Weapon there, so you're just firing 4 Eldritch Blasts. Versus a 15 AC, you are averaging 22 damage, not much less, and 43 on a cursed target that you're burning Quicken Spell sorcery points on. At level 7, Sorcerer 4, you get an ability score increase or a feat. You're going to take the Elven Accuracy feat. And so now, again, Elven Accuracy gives you a +1 to Charisma, Wisdom, or Dexterity. You'll take Charisma, of course. And since you were at 17, now you're at 18, so you get a +4 bonus from your Charisma. And again, with Elven Accuracy, it's fantastic. Anytime you make an attack with advantage, instead of rolling 2 d20s like you normally do, you get to roll 3 d20s, which is just going to increase your hit rate and your crit rate. So it's very strong. At level 9, your Sorcerer 6, you can actually, oddly, use your sorcery points. You have enough sorcery points now to create a 4th level spell slot for yourself, even though you don't otherwise have access to 4th level spells or spell slots. So you could upcast Spiritual Weapon for 2d8 of damage now, which is what I'm going to recommend that you do, because that's going to add up an extra d8 every single bonus action. That's nice. Damage report for level 9. Versus a 10 AC, you will be doing 35 DPR on average. And if your target is cursed and you're using Quicken Spell for more Eldritch Blasts, it's going to be 60 DPR. Against a 16 armor class enemy, you'll be doing 33 DPR, and against the cursed target with Quicken Spells, 58 DPR. Pretty solid. At level 10, Sorcerer 7, You now get 4th level spell slots innately, so you don't need to blow your sorcery points on them to upcast Spiritual Weapon. At level 11, Sorcerer 8, you get another ability score increase. You're going to bump your charisma to 20, so now you're capped. That's fantastic. And Eldritch Blast, more importantly, now fires 3 times when you cast it. So that's like a fighter that gets 3 attacks at level 11, right? Adding your charisma bonus to every attack, made with triple advantage. And if you're using Quicken Spell, that's 6 Eldritch Blasts in a round, and you're getting to the point where you're going to have a lot of sorcery points, and you can create more with spell slots that you're maybe not using. So it's somewhat sustainable, and that's a lot of damage. Skipping ahead to level 13, let's do a damage report. Versus 10 armor class, you're going to be doing 49 DPR, and on your cursed target that you're blowing Quicken Spell on, it's 102. You break 100, and that's on average. So that's very good. And against a 17 armor class enemy, it's 48 DPR, and then 99, almost 100, against the cursed target. Notice that it hardly dips, right, as the AC goes up. That's what's so great about the Elven Accuracy feat is, I mean, the curve is very flat as far as your damage. It does not drop much as the enemy AC goes up. And that's what makes this build particularly competitive with some of the other sustained damage builds. The higher the enemy AC, the stronger this is compared to some of the other builds that we've looked at. Level 14, Sorcerer 11. You now have 6th level spell slots, so you can upcast Spiritual Weapon to a 3d8 if you want. I think it's a great use of the 6th level spell slot, but at the same time, 6th level spells start to get really powerful and crazy, so, think about it. Don't commit to it necessarily if you've got another very compelling use for a 6th level spell. At level 15, you are Sorcerer 12. You get another ability score increase or feat. I am going to recommend taking Warcaster feat. That, among other things, gives you advantage on your concentration checks. So it will just let you hold on to your darkness that much more easily. So that's what I would do. You don't have to if you really feel strongly about something else. At level 17, you actually get a cool Sorceress Origin feature. You get wings. Depending on your alignment, is going to affect what they look like, but you can fly now, which is so cool. And I would actually strongly recommend that you fly often. Fly up into the air and shoot your Eldritch beams down at your enemies for 2 reasons. One, it's going to be a lot harder for melee enemies to hit you when you're 30 feet or 60 feet or whatever in the air. And remember, Eldritch Blast has a range of 120, so you could even get that far. You'd have to move 30 feet each turn, but anyway, you could get way up there if the ceiling's high enough. But maybe more importantly, it will help you avoid trapping your companions in your own darkness bubble. That's going to be one potential pitfall to this build, is you got to make sure that you separate yourself from your companions before you cast darkness on yourself. It's 15 feet in every direction from you, so get at least 15 feet away from your friends before you do that, or else, unless they have devil sight, they're not going to be able to see and will have disadvantage on attacks that they're making from within your own darkness bubble. So now you have wings, and your Eldritch Blast fires 4 times, which is amazing. So damage report versus a 10 armor class enemy, you're doing 61 DPR. Against a cursed target, blowing sorcery points, you're doing 144 damage per round on average. That's awesome. And again, versus an 18 AC, which is pretty high. Even at this level, that's high-ish. 60 instead of 61, right? And 140 against your cursed target instead of 144. So thus the value of Elven Accuracy. Final thoughts on the Eldritch Sorcerer. This build is a lot of fun. You're like a storm cloud, especially at 17 when you're flying, floating around and just shooting out lightning bolts at enemies. Only in this case, they're purple lasers. I imagine they're purple. Maybe they're a different color for your character. You never know when the next one will strike, when or where. Or maybe even, I for some reason have an image of like this rave. Play some house music, and it's just like doom, 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 all these lasers shooting out and nuking all of the bad guys. It's not quite as strong as some of the other sustained DPR builds we've taken a look at until now, particularly at lower levels and lower enemy ACs. But at higher levels, and especially at higher enemy ACs, it really shines and even surpasses a lot of these other sustained damage builds. Also, let's be honest, you get so much more versatility and utility with this build than any of the other sustained DPR builds that we've looked at thus far. You do good sustained damage, and then you get all of this amazing versatility and utility from all of those spell slots and high-level spell slots even that you're really just not using much. I mean, from Tiny Hut to Dimension Door to Disintegrate, plus high-level cleric spells too. Healing and buffing your companions, resurrecting somebody if they die. You are a super powerful, super well-rounded character who can pump out some really solid, sustained DPR without spending much by way of resources, and some exceptional on-demand burst DPR when you really need it. DM tips. If you're running a campaign and finding that you have a character with a build like this that's feeling a little imbalanced, there's a few things you can do. Usually I'm recommending, limiting rest. It doesn't really matter for this character because they can do this all day long. They can do this damage. But there are some things you can do to lessen it or lessen their impact. I mean, make them fight in close quarters. That way they're going to have a hard time getting darkness off because it's going to really hurt the rest of their companions if they're also in that darkness bubble. And so without darkness, they're not going to be doing nearly the same level of damage. Enemies with Dispel Magic to get rid of the darkness will be strong against this build, or enemies with Blind Sight or True Vision or some other way that they can see the sorcerer inside their darkness bubble, then they'll lose any advantage they have. What else? Area effect. Spells and attacks are going to be made without disadvantage against them, so that can particularly be good and potentially knock them out of concentration, for example, and do damage to them. Enemies that are resistant to force damage, because both Spiritual Weapon and Eldritch Blast are force damage attacks. There's not a lot of them, but they're out there. Oddly, either lots of enemies or one big enemy with like a low AC but lots of hit points really kind of normalize the damage output from this character compared to other characters, right? As I've mentioned, they really shine against against high AC targets. And so if this character feels like he's just really outpacing the other characters in your campaign, and people are getting a little disgruntled and sad about that, then that's one way you can rectify it a little bit. But yeah, that's it for episode 6. Thank you for tuning in. A reminder, I do post links to math and spreadsheets and graphs in the show description, the notes to either the YouTube video or to the podcast. So look for them there. And also, I've started doing a master list graph of both sustained damage builds that I've done thus far and Nova damage builds that I've done thus far. And so if you want to compare the crossbow expert fighter to the munger or, whatever, you can do that and see kind of how they vary depending on level, depending on enemy armor class. I hope you find that useful or interesting, at least. Keep in mind, with the Nova damage spreadsheet, you're not really comparing apples to apples there. The damage that I'm showing for the Sorcerer is basically once per long rest. On the other hand, the crossbow expert fighter is once per short rest. And the Warlock Nova builds involve Curse, and they can do that once per short rest as well, but it's for the entire life of one enemy, right? So it's a lot more sustainable than the once per, one turn per long rest type thing. So again, not really comparing to apples. Know what you're getting into, because knowing is half the battle, as we all know, and the rest is red lasers and blue lasers. Yo, Joe. Thanks, everybody. Again, if you want to get in contact with me, have questions, comments, verbal abuse, suggestions, you want to see me do an episode on a particular build you have in mind, etc., please reach out to us on social media, D&D Optimized, or send an email to dndoptimized@gmail.com. Particularly if you have a build that you want me to take a look at, give me some details on what you envision that build to look like and how you think the character should be created and things like that. And I will do my best to optimize it for you. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.